So back in my teen years, specifically in early 2017, I had an addiction. Whereas all the other kids my age were off doing lame stuff such as cultivating their social life or starting to pursue an academic future, I was hooked on Splatoon videos, specifically charger montages. I wasn't even able to play Splatoon for myself yet, but there I was, like one of those small toddlers you see mindlessly staring at an iPad. Except I was a young adolescent who was neglecting more important responsibilities, so it was arguably worse. I was an addict, and my vice was so much of an addict, as a matter of fact, that I decided back then that I was going to play Chargers and Chargers alone when I got my hands on Splatoon 2 later that year. Did I? Does playing one match with the Splat Charger, going 0-7, only to put it down and exclusively play Aerospray for the next 6 months of my life count? Yeah, I was pretty discouraged, but eventually I got over it. Many long years of whiffing shots and being the sole reason for my team's loss later, and I'd say I've gotten pretty decent. It was this very painful, ensnaring, sort of Stockholm Syndrome-esque learning experience that made me go from being frustrated with Chargers to downright loving them. My immense love of Chargers leads us to today, where I'll be giving my woefully uninformed opinions on each of the Chargers currently in Splatoon 3, where they are, where they've been, and just what I adore so much about each of them. Do keep in mind before we get started that I'm not a competitive player, and this is mostly just coming from the perspective of a geeky raccoon with a lot to say and way too much free time on his hands, so don't take anything I say too seriously. That being said, I hope you're ready to go dumpster diving. Let's go. Now, I think I can speak for a lot of Charger mains when I say that these weapons are some of the most daunting to learn in the entire game. The need to have pinpoint accuracy, painstakingly charging each shot before firing, the abysmal ink efficiency, the very obvious laser that telegraphs the exact location of your very vulnerable weapon that has a giant glowing kick me sign on it. It all makes for a very user-unfriendly experience at first. When a weapon class has this steep of a learning curve, you'd better hope the basic weapon of said class can sufficiently ease newcomers in. And as an introduction to Chargers as a whole, I think the Splat Charger does a stellar job, and I love this weapon for just how well it's designed. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still pretty tough to use at first. This definitely ain't no Aerospray, but it really does have all you could ask for. It has enough range to allow the user to position themselves out of harm's way, not constantly pressuring them into close-range engagements all the time. The charge time and ink efficiency, while nothing to write home about, do make it so that missing your shot isn't nearly as punishable as on some of the other snipers. Whiffing one shot doesn't really matter so much when you'll have another one primed and ready to go within literally 1 second. Honestly, it's hard to find a glaring downside to this thing, aside from maybe mobility. A downside which can easily be mitigated through solid positioning, and if you're feeling extra spicy, the charge hold mechanic. Unless you're using the scope. In which case, hey, do you need to talk? Help is out there. Even though it's not a walk in the park, it's actually still more akin to a jog through an active minefield than anything, this weapon does all it can to make learning Chargers just that little bit easier. And make no mistake, this thing isn't just baby's first Charger. In fact, it's the no-frill simplicity of this weapon that makes it downright deadly in the hands of veteran Charger players. It really is that versatile. Speaking of versatility, this thing has Nogami's gift to mankind as its sub-weapon. Ladies and gentlemen, the Splat Bomb. For 3 games in a row now, the basic Splat Charger kit has always been given Splat Bomb, and it's really not hard to see why. Splat Bomb just complements this thing so well. You can flush out enemies from behind corners and walls, you can manipulate enemy movement to make it easier to predict where they'll go. You can even use it as a get-off-me tool, which works to slightly allow for more risky positioning as well as a defensive option. It even makes up for the Charger's lack of painting capabilities somewhat. You can never go wrong with Splat Bomb on any weapon, really. But here, it just works near flawlessly. It ticks most of the boxes that the main weapon cannot. Why did I say most and not all? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. The only thing that's a bit iffy for me is the special, Ink Vac. This special sucks. Just kidding, it blows. Stupid jokes aside, this special is an interesting choice for Charger. Being the slow, long-range weapon that it is, Charger is incredibly vulnerable to surprise attacks and thus likes to hang back far behind its team. Usually this means perching on a platform that's high up and out of reach to other weapons. Ink Vac is a special that not only forces you to leave that position to get maximum usage, it also just straight up renders you unable to attack until it's over. Your only hopes of surviving are by swimming away. Now, that in and of itself isn't a bad thing. In fact, I think being forced to push up a little closer to the fight can make for some really interesting plays. It helps to spice up the occasional monotony of backline play. It's clear that Inkvac is going for a sort of high-risk, high-reward playstyle. The main issue here is that the risk simply doesn't feel worth the reward in some cases. You are mostly invincible from the front, as the vacuum cleaner blocks all oncoming bullets. The reason I say mostly invincible is that the vacuum cleaner is not Splatana-proof, meaning that in some cases, your only option is to watch in abject horror as the windshield wiper-wielding maniac rushes you down and bashes your skull in. And sometimes, even if you do by some miracle manage to survive the vacuum phase, firing the actual shot itself has so much end lag that you are once again left as a sitting duck. And even then, because you're one of the worst weapons in the game at close quarters combat, it's likely that you'll be quickly disposed of by an enemy slayer before you can make it back to safety. Inkvac isn't all bad. In fact, a lot of what I just said can totally be mitigated by solid positioning and team play. Inkvac has some wonderful practical uses when it comes to aiding in pushes in Rainmaker, Tower Control, and Clam Blitz. This thing's even capable of being an anti-special in ways such as consuming Booyah Bombs or Inkjet Shots, both of which being pretty prevalent threats in today's meta. But aside from that, its uses are very niche and either lead to a waste of a special or a taste of death. Luckily, the release of the Fresh season a few months back gave this weapon a brand new kit that fixes pretty much everything wrong with the first one. The Z plus F Splat timeout. Really? ZF Splat Charger? Could you have come up with a dorkier sounding name? It sounds less like the name of a cool water gun sniper rifle and more like I'm reading an algebra equation. Stupid names aside, the ZF Charger is here to serve as the much more tactical and synergistic counterpart to the vanilla kit. Splat Bomb is gone in favor of another Splat Charger staple, Splash Wall, a sub that has yet again been repeated on this thing for both past installments. Man, if you thought Splat Bomb was good, you ain't seen nothing yet. See, the Splat Charger has some serious range, but it's easily kept in check by other long-range options such as the Heavy and Hydra Splatlings as well as the E-Leader. Splash Wall finally gives this thing a tool to contest its competition. Whereas Splat Bomb gave Charger the ability to take riskier plays via a good spacing tool, the Splash Wall allows for much more consistent aggressive positioning. You can now much more effectively hold down an area with a barrier between you and that rabid Hydra Splatling on the enemy team. Now, I will say that this sub is much less of a safety blanket than Splat Bomb, making it not as beginner-friendly. Splash Walls have far too much startup time to be used in a pinch, but I don't think that's what this kit is going for. You definitely have to be much more methodical in utilizing your sub this time, but when you do, the ZF Charger's potential is practically limitless. And I haven't even touched on the special yet. Triple Ig Strike? Are you serious? Splash Wall alone already made this thing a complete nuisance against other backlines, and now it can just drone strike them for funsies? Having such a powerful displacement tool on something like this is much more significant than most people realize. For a weapon that relies on predicting enemy movements to secure splats, having a special that's sole purpose is to force enemies out of an area is massive. Even when not in combat, this special can be used in a pinch to stop pushes by painting the zone or clearing the tower, something that the Splat Charger really struggles to do on its own. And the best part? You can effectively use this special from anywhere, and it doesn't take eons to use. No need to sacrifice your valuable position or your time, just throw your strikes and get back to sniping. Take notes, Inkvac. Yet, despite the ZF's much more cohesive kit, I still have trouble outright calling it the better one. But I'm still going to. I still think the vanilla Charger is definitely the more beginner-friendly option, but the ZF one has just slightly more potential when mastered. Splat Bombs are definitely versatile, don't get me wrong, but the Splash Wall I think just does a better job in aiding the Charger with what it needs to do, which is holding down space and applying constant pressure. And I'm sorry, Tri-Strike just has more use cases than Inkvac, and most likely won't get you killed. Even with that being said, I think both of them are wonderfully designed, catering to players of all different playstyles, which isn't something I can say about all weapons. Sure, they may be the white bread equivalent of Chargers, but hey, white bread is still delicious. So, remember when I said the Splat Charger's slower playstyle led to a much smoother and less stressful learning experience? Yeah, well, I didn't do that. I used the Squiffer. If using the Splat Charger is slowly dipping your toes into the pool to get used to the temperature, well then I strapped on my favorite pair of cement shoes and stepped right into the 6-foot section. Okay, I'm being overdramatic here, it wasn't that bad. In fact, I think the more aggressive nature of the Squiffer led me to get into more fights and thus have more opportunities to practice my aim. Then again, I went negative in pretty much all of my matches earlier on, so it probably just evened out. The main reason I even chose Squiffer in the first place was because I watched this one FLC video where he used the Squiffer in C rank and got like a bajillion kills. Plus, I thought the fact that the Squiffer was literally just a Febreze bottle with a really long neck to be kinda funny. In Splatoon 3, they even added duct tape to its model to further drive home the idea that this weapon is really just something that Sheldon cobbled together using whatever he could find in the janitor's closet. But for a jerry-rigged mess of plastic parts and cleaning supplies, this weapon is pure joy to play once gotten used to. It's just so satisfying. Even simply strafing around with your crazy mobility and charging up shots all lickety-split feels incredibly fluid, and that's without mentioning the numerous other mobility buffs this thing has gotten. Splatoon 2 was where this weapon really began to shine. Like the other chargers at the time, Squiffer got access to the newly introduced charge hold mechanic. And don't get me wrong, that mechanic was a huge buff for all the weapons that got it, but I'd say Squiffer easily gained the most from it. It was already a charger that had insane ground mobility when compared to the rest, and now you're telling me it can do this, just because? This made Squiffer much harder to predict, as stealthier attacks were no longer restricted to just hiding behind walls and playing peekaboo with your opponents. On top of that, this weapon would go on to gain a trait shared by no other weapon in the entire game: the ability to charge at full speed mid-air. This may not sound like that big of a deal, but it paid off in dividends. Squiffer was no longer just glued to the ground like the other chargers. It could strafe and swim and jump all over the place. Suddenly, this thing was a nightmare to keep track of in the heat of battle. And for a one-shot weapon, that's deadly. Yeah, it's lacking in range, but that means absolutely nothing when all of its movement options are this good. Splatoon 3's Squid Roll, and to a lesser extent Squid Surge, would even further boost this thing's movement, especially when combined with the aforementioned mid-air charge. Look, I know I just sort of hit you with a Squiffer history lesson out of the blue, but I feel it necessary to explain just how far this weapon has come. It was already a strong contender to begin with, and with the myriad of buffs it's gotten over the years, it's near unstoppable now. Something that has pretty much never changed for the classic Squiffer is Point Sensor, for better or for worse. Point Sensor is a relatively controversial sub-weapon, with most citing the fact that it literally only marks an opponent's location and does nothing else. But on Squiffer, I think it works alright. Point sensors don't cost very much ink to use, and Squiffer is a decently ink-efficient weapon, meaning that you can afford to toss out a couple of these things to scope things out and still have some shots in reserve. Plus, it's always handy to be able to check around corners and walls before proceeding. The Squiffer is fast, but still not immune to getting pounced on. Also, and this may just be a me thing, but opponents who are marked with Point Sensor are much easier to aim at and hit. It probably has something to do with the contrast of the black indicator against the colorful ink on the ground. I don't know. Point Sensor isn't groundbreaking by any means, and there are definitely far better options to give this thing, but it's not the useless hunk of garbage everyone makes it out to be. A huge plus for the Squiffer this time around is the special, Big Bubbler. Now this is a great addition to the kit. The classic Squiffer in particular has always gotten the game's basic defensive special, and I think this may just be the best one that we've gotten. Big Bubbler is a special that gets more value depending on where you place it. Generally, pushing up further to put it in key choke points is the way to go, and this fits wonderfully with Squiffer's supportive, aggressive hybrid playstyle. You can safely hold down large areas for a surprisingly long amount of time, and that area has only gotten larger since the recent buffs. Although, there is one small thing that I miss from classic Squiffer's previous specials. See, in Splatoon 1 and 2, the classic Squiffer got Bubbler and Ink Armor respectively, both of which provided a temporary boost to your HP while still being of use to teammates. And, most importantly, still allowing for free movement. Squiffer thrives off of being able to move around quickly and freely, and the statue-like nature of the Big Bubbler does bottleneck this somewhat. I mean, it's not like you're stuck inside Big Bubbler once you use it, and your teammates can still very much utilize it either as a defensive wall or as a beacon. And the Squiffer's base mobility means that it can afford to push in a little deeper and place it in more helpful positions. I don't think this makes Big Bubbler a downgrade by any means, far from it. Big Bubbler uses Squiffer's mobility to much more aggressively position itself, rather than accentuating the Squiffer's ability to aggressively position. Again, not bad, it's just a little something I miss from the days of Splatoon 2 Classic Squiffer. And now that we've gone over its current kit, I would like to end this segment with a note addressed to the developers regarding the new Squiffer. Please give it Zipcaster, please, I'm begging you, I will do anything, I'll sacrifice my firstborn, please! Okay, let me level with you guys here. I, Splash Panda, am an E-liter main. Look, I absolutely understand all the hate this weapon gets, but that's not going to stop me from proclaiming this thing as my favorite weapon in the entire game, and yes, I am going to gush about it. I mean, just look at this thing. The designers somehow managed to take one of the most mundane items from everyday life and make it look threatening? Don't get me wrong, I do scream in terror when getting gas, but not because of the pump mechanism. And look at that beautiful chrome tank on the back of the weapon, an element that was weirdly absent from Splatoon 2's iteration. I know it's not a huge deal, but I'm just so happy to have it back. I don't care if I fry my retinas just from looking at it, it's gorgeous. And look at the size of this thing, the model literally clips through the floor. It's this bulky industrial aesthetic that gives the E-liter an imposing appearance, an appearance that perfectly reflects its role on the battlefield. The E-liter is a weapon of extremes. On one hand, it's slow, heavy, and oh man, is it ink hungry. Actually, did you know the 4K in E-liter 4K is an acronym? It stands for 4 shots until you run out of ink, completely unable to save yourself from the inevitable and being forced to look death itself in the eyes. Little known fact. But seriously, that of all chargers, E-liter is by far the most vulnerable. But in typical glass cannon fashion, it has the highest damage of all chargers and the most range out of every single main weapon in the game. Not by very much, it's actually only about 1 extra line of range compared to the basic Splat charger. But that one line makes all the difference. With this extra reach, you can more comfortably outrange other backline threats, such as Hydra Splatlings and Splatterscopes. You can even challenge longer range threats that most other weapons can't, such as Inkjet and Crab Tank. It's insane just how practical this little bit of extra range is. Now, you can't talk about E-liter and its range without at least mentioning the elephant in the room: Splatoon 3's map design. E-liter was always a decently powerful weapon in past games, but it could always be played around by hiding behind cover and accessing flank routes. In Splatoon 3, both of these things are completely out the window. Most maps in the game have maybe 1 or 2 routes to the middle with very minimal cover, which allows the E-liter to dominate like never before. Even as an E-liter main, I feel kinda bad sometimes. Do I feel bad enough to stop? This new design philosophy has been an inadvertent win for the E-liter itself in pretty much every way. No longer do you have to constantly watch your back to check for rogue ink brushes or dualies, and your adversaries have nowhere to hide. Although, it's that exact positive that I feel has somewhat diminished the usability and unique role of its sub-weapon, Ink Mine. See, Splatoon 2's E-liter kit also featured Ink Mine, and out of all weapons to have it, E-liter's relationship to this sub was unique. Weapons such as the Ink Brush Nouveau and Luna Blaster Neo preferred to fight closer to the front line, so they could afford to really push in and place mines wherever they pleased. E-liter, not so much. It was a slow, vulnerable backline weapon, meaning that its mines were to be used for defensive purposes only. Even other slower ink mine weapons, such as Hydra Splatling and Dynamo, weren't completely helpless in close quarters. The E-liter had to make use of its sub if it didn't want to get backstabbed constantly, which made Ink Mine feel useful and more like a lifeline here than on any other weapon. Fast forward to Splatoon 3, and some of these maps literally don't even have flank routes. I mean, look at Hammerhead Bridge. There are 2 ways to reach the sniper perch, both of which are right next to each other, and both lead directly from mid, where there is almost no cover. You'd have to be blindfolded with glaucoma to not see someone coming. I mean, not all maps in the game are as linear as Hammerhead, but it's still a very common trend. Because of that, I find myself using them a lot less often, sometimes just straight up forgetting to use them at all. They're definitely still good though. You can still place them on the entrances to your perch so that they can soften up any intruders in the rare event that you do miss someone sneaking up. You can still be a nuisance and place them on the objective for some nice cheap damage. And yes, you can most certainly still spam them in the event that you have to fight up close. They're not bad. But hey, you wanna know what's really good? Wavebreaker. They gave this thing Wavebreaker. Whoever's idea this was, I want to kiss you on the mouth. Give you a high five. Wavebreaker is everything I wanted in a special for E-liter. It manipulates enemy movement to make it more predictable. It marks and greatly softens up opponents who are tagged by the waves, making them susceptible to partially charged shots. It even works as a decoy, even at higher ranks. I play S+ Anarchy battles almost daily. I know that's not that high, but please just look past that for now. And I'll still see people who stand right out in the open shooting at my Wavebreaker like nobody's looking. Though, I will admit, the throw range on this thing is pitiful. Ideally, you want it to be placed close enough to the fight where it will actually have an impact and trip up as many players as possible. Normally, this isn't a problem, but sometimes, with the range that E-liter likes to position itself at, you're required to go out of your way to place it in a good spot. Also, not usually a problem, as long as you make sure the coast is clear before moving to place it, but I'd be lying if I said I hadn't been caught with my pants down a few times. Despite having one of the slowest playstyles in the game, the E-liter is an absolute blast, ripping through foes from across the stage and getting to hang back and be both the eyes and backbone of your team. It can't be beat. I quite like the way the Splatoon NA Twitter account put it. This is the granddaddy of chargers, although I think a more apt comparison would be with your mother. It works tirelessly to support its 3 hungry teammates, always there to help them and protect them from harm. Even when its team isn't doing so great, it's always there as a super jump point, an anchor. Also, not unlike your mother, E-liter falls under the heavyweight category, and with that, we've reached the end of the video. Now, the original intention for this was to cover all of the chargers at once, but that would end up being a lot, to put it lightly. So I've decided to save the more unorthodox chargers for the next video. Plus, I plan to cover any new chargers that might be added in the meantime. As of me recording this, we're actually not far off from the reveal of the Drizzle Season weapons. We've only received 2 new chargers since the launch of the game, so here's to hoping the new update will deliver on that front. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this little regurgitation of thoughts. Chargers have been and will always be my absolute favorite weapon class, so it was a ton of fun to talk about them, and I can't wait to get to the rest. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see that, then consider hitting like and subscribing to be notified when I upload next. And also, I'm pretty new to this whole YouTube thing, so don't hesitate to leave a comment letting me know what you think. Seriously, I can't thank you enough for watching. And before I go, remember, always booyah back.